Welcome to our Larimer County Loveland campus. Not sure how many people have been to this building before, but this facility opened, 4 years ago now. And it's great to have a nice facility like this on the southern part of town, so our South County residents can come be involved in some of the things that we're doing. I'm Michelle Bird. I'm the Public Affairs Director for Larimer County. Tonight I'm going to be your facilitator. So really what it means for this evening, we're using as a fancy term for IT help and move the mic around during Q&A. So that's going to be my role tonight. I just want to let you know, bathrooms, in case you need a bathroom, they're straight across kind of this little courtyard area, I guess is what you call it. And that's all I have. So how it's going to go tonight, we have our 5 presenters. They're going to present for about 10 to 15 minutes, depending on who it is. We'll have a very brief Q&A after each session to ask some clarifying questions about their presentation. But we do want to get through all the presentations before we open it up for kind of bigger questions. So we have about 30 minutes at the end for bigger questions. With that, I would like to hand it over to Commissioner Kristen Stevens.
Thank you, Michelle. Good evening, everyone. I'm Kristen Stevens, Larimer County Commissioner. Welcome, and thanks for coming out this evening. And I just wanted to introduce my colleague, Commissioner Jody Shattuck McNally. She's the chair of the Board of County Commissioners this year, and we're both happy to be here. So the purpose of this series, if you don't know already, you probably do, is to inform the community about water-related issues and initiatives in the region. We also want to answer your questions and provide resources to you, and we want to get folks engaged in water issues and provide opportunities to take action. So thank you to our partner, the Colorado Water Center at CSU, for co-hosting this event with us. They've done excellent work in developing sessions and lining up speakers that will inform us about local water issues. And so I'm going to introduce Karen Schlatter. Karen is the Associate Director. There's Karen, she can wave. You probably see her name tag though. Karen is Associate Director of the Colorado Water Center at Colorado State University. She leads the development and implementation of the center's outreach and engagement strategy and specializes in stakeholder engagement and watershed planning and management. Karen previously worked at the University of Florida Water Institute to improve water management in Florida, that doesn't sound easy, through projects related to climate change, agricultural management practices, and freshwater systems. She also worked at the Sonoran Institute for a decade, leading landscape-scale restoration of the Colorado River Delta in Mexico. So without any further ado, here's Karen.
Thank you, Commissioner Stevens, and thank you, Larimer County, for co-hosting this event and really being kind of the instigators of this all. So I'm going to just talk a little bit about what you can expect today. Our water education series, this is the second of our sessions focused on water conservation and sharing. We've got another one on October 18th that will also be at this location in Loveland on watershed health and in-stream flows. And then our last one will be November 16th, What's Next for Larimer County Water. And our agenda today, so we've got a wonderful lineup of speakers today. I'm going to kick it off with just a little bit of background information on water conservation and sharing, kind of a Water 101 talk. Then we'll hear about overview of agriculture, agricultural water efficiencies and conservation, water sharing between agriculture and municipalities, urban water use and conservation, and then we'll have time at the end, hopefully about a half hour, for question and answer and some panel discussion. So that's where we're going. And I'm going to introduce our great speakers now. Whoops, that's not the right slide. So in order, so I'll be doing the Water 101, you already heard about me. Greg Peterson is the Executive Director of the Colorado Ag Water Alliance, which is comprised of agricultural leaders from across Colorado committed to the preservation of agriculture through the wise use of Colorado's water resources. Greg received a master's in political economy of resources from the Colorado School of Mines and previously worked as a teacher. Joel Schneekloth is the Water Resources Extension Specialist at the Colorado Water Center. He is responsible for the development of research and demonstration projects relating to water quantity and quality issues that are attributable to agriculture and urban water use, and helps to develop educational programming to help magnify water issues to the public. Joel specializes in drought education and mitigation, irrigation management, and alternative cropping systems. He also collaborates with Nebraska and Kansas on regional water issues. Then we've got Brett Bovee. He is the president of West Water Research based in the Fort Collins office. Brett brings close to 20 years of experience conducting a variety of engineering, economic, and water rights studies across the western states. He assists clients in buying water rights, valuing water, evaluating water supply risk, and planning for future water challenges. Brett brings a unique perspective to projects, combining a background in water resources engineering with a developed knowledge of water rights and economics. And finally, we have Katie Collins. Katie is a water conservation specialist with Fort Collins Utilities, currently working on outdoor water conservation programs and an update to Fort Collins landscape standards. She graduated from Colorado State University's College of Agriculture with a degree in horticulture. Prior to joining the water conservation team in 2017, Katie spent over 10 years in the green industry, leading the good, the bad, and the ugly about landscaping and irrigation. When she's not at work, she likes to play with her kids, hunt for insects, and pinch tomato plants. We have a lot in common. Okay, so let's give a warm welcome to our panel today. And we have an exciting set of talks here for you. So again, we're going to go through each presentation, and we'll have a little bit of time at the end for clarifying questions and then open it up at a big discussion at the end. So I will get right into it. Okay. With some background on water conservation and efficiency and sharing. So, and hopefully that will give us the foundation that we need to dive a little bit deeper into the presentations you'll hear in a little bit. So first I'll talk about why it's important to save water in Colorado. And then what do we exactly mean by water conservation and efficiency? What do those look like in practice? And what is conservation and efficiency in the context of water law and administration? So when we think about water conservation and sharing, it's important to know how we're actually using water in our state. So this is consumptive water use, which is important to know. This is the water that's being consumed, not just diverted. So if you think about water that you might put on your garden, some of that water is going to be taken up by plants. Some of that water is going to go into the ground, go back into the groundwater, maybe eventually make it to a stream or a river. So we're talking about water that's consumed by humans, animals, crops, vegetation, getting taken up into products, basically not available for immediate use. And when we look at that use by sector, 90% is consumed by agriculture, 7% municipalities, and 3% industry. So why is it important to save water in our state? Well, this is a map of the annual average precipitation. You can see on the eastern part of the continental divide, it's a fairly arid region. So we're getting anywhere from 10 to 18 or 20 inches of rain on average per year. That's not a whole lot. And then when we translate that into what it means for our surface water supply, this map shows the major rivers and streams in Colorado. The dark blue lines are the typical wet year flow, and the light blue line is the typical dry year flow. So you can see on the eastern part of the continental divide, there's a lot of white space compared to the western part of the continental divide. And we just don't have a ton of surface water flows coming to this part of the state due to that aridness of our region and the lack of significant precipitation. So the issue comes with 90% of our population lives on the eastern part of the continental divide, and 80% of our water falls on the western part of the divide. So it becomes important to conserve all that precious water. Then when you throw in things like climate change, this graph shows the observed and projected average annual temperature in Colorado from 1950 to 2070. So you can see here, and I don't know if I'll be able to do this, there we go. This is where we are presently, so we're already at about 2 degrees Fahrenheit above kind of the average over the longer term. By 2050, a normal year in Colorado is expected to be 3 degrees higher than it was in 2012. Now, what this means when we think about our water supply, if you imagine irrigating crops on a day that's 95 degrees, you might need to use a little bit more water than on a day if it's 85 degrees. If you think about forest up in our headwaters, where all snow and rain is hitting in those nice mountains that we have, vegetation, when it's hotter, it has to use more water. It needs more water, and that's gonna leave less water flowing down in our streams, less water available for our urban and agricultural uses. So despite, even if there are no changes in the amount of precipitation that we actually get, these changes in temperature will have a significant impact on our water supply. Then when you add in the factor of increasing population and growth all along the Front Range, you can see Larimer County is up here. It's one of the red counties. That means it's gonna have greater than 100,000 population change from 2020 to 2050. That just adds increasing strain to our water supply as well. You add more people, probably gonna need more water. Hence the need for water conservation and efficiency. And I'm just gonna talk through what these terms mean and what they look like in practice. So water conservation refers to the beneficial reduction in water loss, water waste, or use. So it's essentially anything that's designed to reduce the overall amount of water that we're using. If you think about when you're taking a shower, you might turn off the water when you wash your hair, or you just take a shorter shower. That's water conservation. If you're doing your laundry, maybe you wait until you have a really big load, you wash your laundry less frequently. Same with your dishes. Maybe you wait until your dishwasher's full, and then you do a load. When we look at water efficiency, this is the minimization of the amount of water used to accomplish something. So, and it's usually done with higher tech products or fixtures. So if we go back to our shower example, not only are we doing water conservation by taking shorter showers, maybe if we have a low flow shower head, we're actually using less water every time we turn on that water. So that's efficiency. Same thing with high efficiency dishwashers, low flow toilets, etc. Okay, now when we get to conservation and efficiency in agriculture, it takes on a little more nuanced meaning. And Joel and Greg, I'm sure, will help explain this a little bit better than I can, but just an overview. So water conservation in agriculture, this is talking about field scale reduction of crop water consumptive use. So that's the water that's being taken up by plants and used by the plants to grow. Now, if you apply, let's say you have a cornfield and you're flood irrigating it. Let's say you want to reduce your crop water consumptive use and you just reduce the amount of water that you're applying to that crop. Well, you're gonna get a reduction in yield. So it's gonna damage your yield. You're gonna reduce your water consumptive use, but you're also gonna damage your yield. Another way of reducing your consumptive use is just fallowing your field or planting alternative crops that are gonna use less water. When we talk about efficiency in agriculture, this is decreasing water loss at a field or farm scale, while hopefully maintaining or increasing that yield. So again, if you think about a cornfield and you're flood irrigating it, some of that water is being taken up by the plant. A lot of that water is going down into the ground and going into the groundwater table, maybe eventually making it back to a stream. If you implement a sprinkler or a drip irrigation system, you are more efficiently applying the water to that field. You're using less water, but it's still, the crop is able to get the same amount of water. It's still taking up the same amount of water. It's not significantly changing the consumptive use, but you're reducing that water loss that's going back as return flows to the system. And like I said, Joel is going to talk about that more. And so when we think about conservation and efficiency in the context of water law and administration, this is just an important point I wanted to bring up because it does have impacts on what we're able to do and kind of the resources available to do some of this work. So first and foremost, prior appropriation doctrine is the water law that governs water in Colorado. There are many different components to this, and I'll just mention a few. So first of all, the earliest water users have the highest priority use. First in time, first in right. Secondly, you must put the water to beneficial use. You cannot waste it. You cannot be speculative with the water. And then thirdly, which is something I want to bring up here, is there's a component of it that if you don't put it to beneficial use for 10 years, there's a risk of losing it to abandonment if that is your intent. It has to be through intent. There's a little bit of misconception with this component of it because let's say you're, again, irrigating that corn crop and you're flood irrigating it, you want to switch to a sprinkler system. And you think, if I start using less water, maybe I'll lose my water rights because I'm going to be using less water for a long time. But the water rights are actually based on consumptive water use, historical consumptive water use. So if you change your irrigation system, it should not significantly affect your water consumptive use of the crop. In fact, your consumptive use might actually go up if you change to an efficient system. So just want to point that out. In 1991, we had the Colorado Water Conservation Act, and then a lot of subsequent legislation that was essentially developed to promote urban water efficiency and conservation. So we have things like the water conservation plans being developed by different municipalities. We have things like gray water use being legal, different things to help urban water users become more efficient. 2015, we had the first state Colorado plan adopted. And just this year, we had an update of that plan. So we have the now 2023 Colorado Water Plan, and just provides kind of a roadmap for doing better water management, including a lot of conservation and efficiency measures. And then lastly, just want to point this one out as it relates to water conservation. So in 2016, rainwater harvesting was made legal in Colorado. There's a 2-barrel limit. And again, this just highlights the importance of that return flow aspect in our system. Beforehand, it was illegal to collect rainwater because essentially any of that rainwater you're collecting, that's someone else's water that goes downstream. But it was, through pilot projects and other projects, this was eventually made legal in 2016, although there is a limit on how many barrels you can have. So with that, I will stop. Hopefully that gave you a nice quick overview of what we're going to be talking about. I do highly recommend the Water Education Colorado Citizens Guide to Colorado Water Conservation. It's available online, it's free, it has all of the background information you might ever want to know about water conservation in our state. And I will stop and take any questions if we have time.
We only have one mic, so you'll have to take questions from there. Again, I know a lot of the topics that Karen touched, we're going to hear a little bit more about later, but if you have any clarifying questions you want to ask now to Karen, this is your shot. There's one down there. Hold on.
Thank you. I'll be brief. This is just about the barrels, the rainwater. Is there also a limit on how long you can hold the water, or is it just that you can have 2 barrels of water?
I am not sure of the amount of how many barrels you can go through. I think it's just a 2-barrel limit, and however much water you can collect is
Okay, I think maybe I'm
It's up to
recalling New
you.
Mexico's law where you had to actually empty your barrel in 72 hours or something. So there was some time related to it, I think, so.
So
Katie, do you know? Oh,
you don't have to, but we have a very similar rule to actual legal storage vessels, reservoirs, ponds that are used for flood control. We call that the 72-hour rule.
Oh, I see.
So
Okay.
we have that. So, and you'll see that throughout areas like this where you have those ponds that fill up with rainwater during storm events, and it's a way where they don't have to actually get a storage right and be a reservoir and operate, but they're still not affecting the hydrology of the system too. Yeah.
All right, with that, we'll make sure we put that link to the Water Education Colorado Citizens Guide on the website so that it's easy for you guys to get to. I think we'll move on to Greg. It's totally up to you, Greg. There you go. I'll take my stuff and move out of the way here.
All right. Well, thank you. I'm Greg Peterson. I'm with a group we called the Colorado Ag Water Alliance, or CAWA. And we're an association of most of the ag groups throughout the state. And so I have a board member representing the potato growers, wheat growers, fruit and veg, pork, beef, egg producers, even aquaculture. And most of my job is spent, I probably drive about 40,000 miles a year around the state, meeting with farmers and ranchers in every basin, just talking about water issues, write a lot of grants for farmers and ranchers to go after money for all sorts of projects, a lot of infrastructure projects. And then we also fund our own projects throughout the state, either relating to water use and even water quality. And so that's what I do. And I'm going to give some really broad strokes of water and agriculture. That is an enormous subject, and really just kind of hope that we can go from there. And so I really like this chart. And this is just a pie chart of water use in Colorado. And I think one thing that and maybe this helps me deflect a little bit of the attention away from us in the ag community, but actually most of the water in our state has to leave state lines and meet our compacts. I mean, those are agreements that we've had for quite some time. And so, yeah, most of the water has to leave our state through any of the number of the compacts, the apportionated agreements that we have. And then of that water that's in the state, agriculture uses you'll hear from anywhere from 75, 80, all the way up to 90% of that water is used within the agricultural community. And we get a lot of attention because of that, especially in times lately when it's drier, and it's like, well, why are we bothering with water conservation in indoors? It's all these, what are they doing with all that water? And I'm here to talk a bit about that. And I think what a lot of people don't quite understand is that Colorado is an agricultural state, and not just and you're like, oh yeah, I saw some corn out here. There was a few cows. No. We are, for the size that we are punching high above our weight, and we are more like an agricultural powerhouse when it comes to a lot of industries. And I don't think people quite realize that. And I want to really highlight that 85% that we get. What are we doing with that, and what does that actually mean for our community? And so I just wanted to touch on a few things. And first, often, well, what do we even produce here? I mean, and we're top 20 nationwide for a number of products. I mean, we're top for things like millet. We're number 4 for cattle, number 3 for sheep. One of the biggest producers of winter wheat. Way down in the San Luis Valley, second biggest region of fresh market potatoes in the country. And I mean, we are producing a lot of agriculture in this state. And I think that's something that a lot of people, when I would show this a few years ago, they're like, well, marijuana. And it's like, no, and we raise a lot of livestock and a lot of forage in this state. And since we're really talking about this map, you can find, and I can send it to you, it's of all the counties in Colorado, but really just focusing here on the South Platte and also the Republican. When I say the Republican River, who knows what I'm talking about? Okay, good. Because sometimes I'm like, what Republican? Where's the Democrat River? And it's like, no. So this area out here in like Yuma, Kit Carson County, And some of the most in terms of, these are the top of, you have so many counties in northeastern Colorado that are in terms of top 10, and these are gross receipts, agricultural receipts. Weld County is actually in the top 10 in the counties in the country. I mean, when you're looking, we're number 5, in top five now, generally. And I mean, you're talking, up there, it's just really Texas and California counties are dominating that, and then Weld County. Yuma County, they're usually, they're in the top 25. Yuma County produces a ton of corn and livestock, beans, winter wheat. And so then when we're talking about the value that comes out of this, this is one of the most productive, not just, one of the most productive regions in the state, but in the area. And so what does that really look like? So really, we're talking about 1.3 million irrigated acres in the South Platte, which is only about 33% of the actual land that's farmed. A lot of dry land. But that irrigated acreage, it's about 60% of the value. It makes up a lot of that value that we are generating. And about $8.5 billion in direct secondary economic output, 50,000 jobs, $2.1 billion in labor compensation. And this is actually, and this is statewide, but you do have a lot of this in the South Platte, is on dollars spent in research. Colorado's number 3 after California and Texas. And so there is a ton of research, people that are paying people like Joel throughout this, but not just Joel. You have a lot of innovative private industries based in Colorado doing research here in ag. And so yes, there's an economic value to this, but there's also some other values that we really try to highlight in the ag community that we see often, and I don't think we're really good at telling the story about. And that's something that we struggle with. And these are values that we see, and we're worried that you all won't notice until agriculture's gone. And you're wondering, oh, well, it was nice when we had all that habitat or all these other benefits. And one of the ones that we're involved with quite a bit is water quality. And I'm not going to say, oh, agriculture, we have no water quality impacts. We're perfect. No. That's not accurate. But in a lot of areas, especially on the western slope, you have these irrigated meadows. There are some real benefits to irrigated agriculture and water quality. And that also the alternative of this irrigated agriculture of developed lands or dried up lands, those have severe water quality impacts. If you look at most watersheds throughout the state, and you look at, what is the largest contributor of nutrients? It's wastewater treatment plants. Often that's anywhere from 60 to 80, 85%. In many places, and then in a lot of places, its agriculture ranges from 5 to 15. In some areas, just as much as the natural landscape. It can depend on the type of agriculture. But what we're worried is that irrigated cornfield, that irrigated ranch, right now, that is not only are there going to be other benefits, but in terms of the water quality impact, it's far less severe than any of the alternatives that we could have, whether it's going to be developed or dried up. And then just getting into what we see a lot is habitat. This is one unfortunate thing, is you don't have a lot of research done on this, and it's very hard to do. But I know there's one, actually, it was done up on north of the Poudre on the New Cache Laputer system up there. And they did a study just on all the seepage losses. When we irrigate, sometimes we flood irrigate or either sprinklers. Water's going, it doesn't all go to the crop. And when we're running ditches, there's water dripping out of it. And these riparian habitats that form along these ditches, that's not natural. These ones that are at all these ends of these fields, that was not how it used to be out here. And in places, and from the studies that we do have along the eastern plains, anywhere from 80 to 90% of that riparian habitat is ag irrigation water. And you see that a lot in these drier years, especially when wildlife, they can't find forage. and they're going out onto farms, ranches, and they're eating their crops for whatever forage is available. And that's a huge benefit that these properties provide that we have a really hard time communicating. And it is hard to demonstrate what is the benefit, what is the habitat benefit of this. But I tell people, like I grew up in Littleton, I live there. My community does not support habitat for wildlife. I don't have owls, I don't have bears, I don't have elk, I don't have deer, but these are things that you're gonna see in a lot of these agricultural settings. And then just scenery and open spaces. I mean, that's another benefit that these kinds of industries provide besides providing us food. And so one thing that we always try is how do we put a value on this? And this is something that we do struggle with, but just want to highlight that irrigated agriculture, it's not just food. It is habitat. It is scenery. It is recreation. And then what happens when we lose that? And we lose the value. And there is a severe economic value to that. Who here has ever been to Crowley County, Colorado? Okay, well, yeah, you all have. You don't count. So starting in the 1970s, Crowley County, prior to that, Crowley County was an agricultural paradise. You had Sugar City. One of the biggest producers of beets in the region. I mean, huge beet production there. And it was just this agricultural paradise that we had. And then starting in the 1970s, you had individual landowners selling off their water rights. And they did this for really understandable reasons. I mean, I've met some of these people, and it was to send their kid to college. I mean, to buy a car. One family, they didn't even have a dishwasher. But the value that these water rights generated is so much more than a one-time payment can ever equate to. And they started and to the date now, we're about 95% of the water in Crowley County is owned by outside municipalities. And Crowley County is number one in terms of poverty in the state. And usually, and you look at participation in programs like CHIPS, SNAP, every kind of welfare program we have, they're usually in the top 10. They have never been able to recover from this. There's been multiple attempts at bringing in new industries. It does not happen. I mean, that irrigated agriculture in these rural communities, it's not just the direct receipts to those farmers and ranchers. It is all the industries around it. I mean, they thrive on that production agriculture operating. And it's not just them, it's the counties. The amount that counties get from irrigated farmland to dry land is significantly different. And often in many places, these counties immediately, they are severely impacted by this dry up when it occurs. And it doesn't get better. I mean, these are recent pictures of Crowley County. And I work down there pretty often, and right now there's really just about 4,000 acres of irrigated acres left amongst these 9 family farms, and we're trying to figure out how do we even save what's left of this, because nothing else since the 70s has really come in to try to deal with this problem that they've had, and this is their economy. And there really isn't much of an alternative. So when we talk about the value of agriculture and what it does and what it might not do, when we lose that, I mean, we do have examples of this throughout the state, and it can be pretty bleak. And it isn't just an impact to them. It's like, it is, I think, really an impact that we're starting to see of food security and being able to produce our own food. And I understand that, I mean, there is a cost to producing food, but as one of my board members, Chris Kraft, he owns a dairy over in Fort Morgan, he'll tell you food's not optional. And we can get it here, and we can get the benefits of agricultural production, or it can come from somewhere else, and we don't get those benefits. And we get a lot of negative consequences with that. And I'm not gonna say that, there's no negative environmental impacts of agriculture. That happens, absolutely. And it's something that the community has actually been doing impressive work on really the past 20 years. You can see it in just practices. But working with us to do even better, I think, is really the path forward. Because I think especially now is a time where the community definitely feels like there's a target on their back. And it's like, how much longer are we even going to be able to do this? And are people even going to notice or care when we're gone? And all these other benefits that I believe that we all get besides food, we're really going to miss those if we do lose agriculture. So I think that was all. I don't know if there's much time for questions.
There is time for questions. So, questions. Hold on just a...
I have so many questions in my head. I'm not stressing. My head's exploding right now.
Here, we got to use the mic because we're recording, so that's how people hear. I know. All that pressure.
Here we go. Stand back. So what I see is that we have a growth-based economy, and we have to keep growing.
Talk in the mic.
This is a growth-based economy, and we have to keep growing. And that's what I see is going on here. We have to spread the water thinner in order to keep growing. There's 800 new houses going in north of Mahaffey Park. So what's going to happen when we start cutting back on all the evapotranspiration from the lawns we've been growing for 100 years? What's going to happen to all those non-native trees when the humidity level drops and our atmosphere looks more like the atmosphere on the eastern plains where it's 106 degrees? So I have all this stuff going on in my head, and I was trained as an environmental population and organismic biologist 50 years ago when we were talking about this, and nobody listened. So here we are 50 years down the road, and we're slapping Band-Aids on it. So yeah, I'm sorry.
That's okay. No, you're good.
Sorry, guys.
No, that's okay. Go ahead.
I'll ask a question. Of that acreage, just out of curiosity, is there hard numbers or estimates of how much of that is corporate, big business farming versus our small farmers who are trying to survive? And that water that they receive, is any of that subsidized? I mean, how cheap is that water for them to be able to farm and produce products that maybe come at a lower price than they should be? Things of that nature. There's issues surrounding that, I believe, and I'm wondering how much we are benefiting locally from some of those big corporate farms and those.
Yeah, and Joel, you might be able to touch better on the corporate. I know this comes up a lot. I don't run into a lot of corporate farms. They exist. They're absolutely there. But they're, if anything, in quite a few communities, they're often ostracized.
Corporate farms are family-owned corporations.
Yeah.
There's 5 kids helping with the farm operation. Len's Farms.
Yeah.
How many kids are in there? They call that a corporate farm, but it's a family-owned business. They set it up as a corporation because of liability and passing it down generations.
I do know that farming in California, for example, at one point was controlled by petroleum companies by much bigger interests. Sorry, I know in other states that's been an issue with farms being owned by outside interests. The bulk of the farms owned by railroad companies, oil, petroleum companies, so forth. Maybe we don't face that in Colorado. I'm curious.
Yeah, well, it's, like Joel mentioned, I think it's 91% of the farms in Colorado are family farms. There's a couple of properties I know that are owned by oil companies on the western slope because back in the 70s, they bought into them because they thought they were going to need water for oil extraction, and that all didn't pan out. Honestly, these are the minority. A bigger component is honestly the trophy ranches on the western slope. I mean, biggest ranch in Ouray County is Ralph Lauren. Mm-hmm. And you have, and you've also got, you've got a couple of investment firms, and they're out competing what young farmers and ranchers can pay for land and buying that up. And you've got some in Delta County, some over in Mesa County. I'd say those are more of a concern and a larger portion of acreage than any kind of corporate other entity. But I guess the subsidizing water, oh boy, I don't know. if I'm on a ditch or a ditch company, I mean, I'm on a ditch, and we all pay assessments every year for that ditch company. And so is it less than what your potable water is? Yeah, I can't drink it. I'd die with the amount of E. coli in it. But this is, and so most ditch companies are set up where people are paying an amount to maintain that infrastructure. And that's what you're paying with your water bill, is to maintain that infrastructure to deliver that water to you. And your tap fee is to add, so that when you have a new structure, is so that your water provider can go out and find new water. So, and with some of these larger projects on the western slope, like the Uncompahgre project, that is a Bureau of Reclamation project, I mean, they set their amounts per acre foot of what they charge people, and it's all based on what is it going to take for them to maintain the maintenance on their project. So do they pay less than you per? Yeah, but it's not potable water, and it also costs, in some ways it does cost less, where if you have, I think a good example is like a lot of these ditches owned by a single user, they're not paying anything for that water, but they're also dealing with a ditch that they have to maintain and put the labor into. And also many of those ditches, you get water for a month, 2 months. You're getting what you pay for. And so in that way, we don't operate in places like California, where you have these really large districts that essentially own and distribute most of the water.
I'm just going to hand it back to you.
Okay.
So, Joel, actually, I think we should, and I don't think we did this for Karen either. I think we should give Greg and Karen a round of applause. Now it's your turn.
Okay. So Karen talked to me and said, "Can you talk about efficiency in ag and what it will do?" And I guess the question I got to ask: does it save water? How many people here think high efficiency in agriculture saves water? A few hands. We'll find the answer out here in a bit. This is your pilot speaking. We're sitting at 30,000 feet. This topic is multiple semesters worth of work. These can be careers. And I'll apologize right now. I'm not a graphic designer. I'm an engineer. So some of these things are pretty crude. So agriculture in the South Platte Basin, last numbers I saw, 86% of the water in the basin is agricultural use. 5 of the top 10 counties are in the South Platte Basin. Greg showed the map. Well, the South Platte Basin and the Republican Basin are separate, hydraulically separated. They both meet up around Kansas City in the system. But as far as the round tables go, the Republican is in the South Platte Basin. But we're talking about the South Platte. It's 5 of the 10. $3.5 billion of agricultural production out of those 5 counties. 854,000. Greg's number included the Republican Basin, which is about 550,000, depending on the year. 80% of the population is in the South Platte Basin. Denver, Fort Collins, all the way to the state line. And I'll guarantee you, most of it's west of I-25. South Platte is always net water short. We always complain about it. But can increasing efficiency help solve the problem? Time and time again in my career, if we just increase the efficiency in agriculture, we'll have all this water that we can utilize. But the system is very complex. It's not this simple. And we'll get into this. So we talked about return flows. We talked about irrigation. So here we have, up here, water from the river system. It's getting into canals, ditches. It's metered out. It is metered. You don't get all the water you want. There's water rights for every producer. I get 2 CFS at this diversion grate. I get 5 at this one. I get 1, and I only get so many days. And there's also time periods when people get cut off, and we'll talk about it. But irrigation, we irrigate. Of course, this shows sprinklers, but there's water losses, and primarily historically, the South Platte was furrow irrigation, not mechanical sprinkler. Slowly it's getting converted. But a lot of that water was deep perked or did run off. Well, we sit on a wonderful little thing called an alluvial aquifer underneath the South Platte Basin. What is it, Greg? About 900 to 1 million acre feet of potential storage in that alluvial aquifer? And that alluvial aquifer feeds back to the river system. And we'll talk a little bit. And that return flow has developed that system. We didn't move into Colorado, everybody didn't move into Colorado and then start setting up irrigation all the way up and down the whole basin. It developed here, the return flows developed, it was developed here, return flows developed from that, and it just went down the river, and there was different points. One of the most senior and one of the biggest drivers in the river is by Sterling. What is it, an 1862 right or an 1864 right? Sterling number one? Yeah, I think it's an 1862 right. So they can they have one of the biggest priorities, earliest priorities. I mean, there's more up here by the Front Range that are earlier priorities, but they were mostly developed by mining, sold off into that. The Union Colony out of Greeley actually was the first really true agricultural one. And in fact, you talk about gold mining was in Colorado. Who made more money during that gold mining period? So people who grow produce and sold to the gold miners. That's what I'm hearing. So the development of this system and the return flows. Furrow irrigation, yeah, it's not efficient on a farm. So we got to look at on-farm efficiency versus basin. There are, furrow irrigation has its place because small, irregular shaped fields, it's efficient for that system because it's cheap. Center pivots are efficient at getting the water into the right place at the right time if they're developed right, designed right, and managed right in the system. The primary reason why most producers are going to high efficiency pivots, it's not efficiency of the water, it's labor. Nebraska did a study years ago. If I'm all furrow irrigated, I can manage about 800 acres. If I go to pivots, I can manage between 1,500 to 2,000 acres for one person. So it's labor. And price, furrow is already there. It's a low-cost system. To buy a new center pivot today, it's over $100,000 per pivot. And then you got to develop the pumping system and all that to do that. Settling basins on top of that. So it's pricey. Water conservation, irrigation efficiency. The biggest thing is actual consumptive water use that we got to look at within these systems. How much water is being diverted, how much is being consumed, and how much is getting back to the river? And how does efficiency impact stream flows? Because we love to see our stream. The pioneers said the Platte River and the South Platte were a raging flood in the spring, and you could walk across it and not even get your ankles wet in the summer. Can you do that today? No. Why is that? Return flows. Like I said, I'm not an artist. This is simplistic, but it's easy numbers, and these numbers are not actual numbers. They're just representative to show what happens. So we start off in this one section. We have 20 CFS, cubic feet per second. That's the way water's measured in the system. This guy diverts off 5. Well, now we have 15. Next guy diverts off 5. We have 10. We divert off another 5. Down the system is 5. And say, this is the state line. Here's Nebraska. And we have compact with Nebraska to meet water obligations. With that. Okay, now we go to a lower flow situation, like late summer. We have 10 CFS going in the system. We divert 5 off. Well, now we have 5. He diverts 5 off. Oops, it's dry. And now we have this guy going like, I don't have any water. But I'm the senior water rights guy. I'm calling up river. You're shutting off, you're shutting off, you're shutting off until I get my water. Now this is assuming there's no such thing as return flows. How do return flows work? Well, now I got that 10 CFS. I divert my 5. 3 CFS goes back to the river because a furrow irrigation system's 40, 50% efficient on delivering water, and also the canal seepage that you have in place. And now I divert 5. I have 3. Well, here we have 6. We have 4 CFS. That 4 is supposed to be over here. As you can see, we still have water in the river. Nobody's making calls unless the state of Nebraska says that's not enough water for me during the summer. So the 3 CFS is being returned. So you can see the advantages to return flows in the system. Now, go back here. If we didn't have that return flows, but we cut our consumptive use, but we were highly efficient, we'll start out with 10. Now I'm down to 7. I'm down to 4. Now I'm down to 1. That's the return flow factor in the system. And return flows are very tough to predict and measure. There are some models out there that we utilize to estimate return flows, because when people are pumping out of the groundwater, in 2002, Empire Lodge lawsuit set off a firestorm, Greg, right? Shut off how many acres? Yeah, 150,000 acres that were groundwater irrigated. Yeah, 10,000. I don't think it was quite 10. It was like 8,000 something. So it set off this firework because they did not have the water rights to return back to the river to support their water use, because they were using water in the alluvial aquifer and they couldn't replace it in time and amount. That's the key to water rights, time and amount. 3 minutes, right? Okay, we're moving right along here. So low efficiency is a wonderful thing. We got a lot of water here with the return flows. Even at high efficiency, we got a lot of water, but there's less water in the system. The alluvial aquifer is our reservoir that we use. It's not above ground, it's below ground. So it's tough to see. So return flows, return flows are what built irrigation within the basin. Like I said, the river developed. Now it's got water in the summer. I can utilize that. So I build my diversion. I build my reservoir based off of that. Stabilize flows during the summer when flows were generally low or non-existent. Returning water to those low flow time periods. That's what return flows are. And that's the building of these systems that have happened historically that we don't see. Can you stick your head underneath the ground and see what's going on? And well, an ostrich might. The water supply. And this is 1 + 1 does not always equal 2. 1.4 million acre feet is native water supplies in the South Platte Basin. We import from the West Slope about 400,000 acre feet. The 400,000 acre feet can be used to net extinction. Cities like Fort Collins, if they have it, Denver, all that, they keep track to the nearest drop of what their trans-basin diversions are, and then they can keep reusing that. And there's been systems built in the South Platte to reuse that. Prairie Waters is one. So annual diversions up and down the South Platte, 4 million acre feet per year, out of 1.4 million acre feet. That shows you the value of the return flows. Now, if we start going higher efficiencies, we dry up the river, we have to have storage somewhere along the line to replace that. And how easy is it to get a reservoir built in Colorado? Yeah, Eric Wilkinson started out and he says, I should look at your career should be built by how far you advance on developing water, building reservoirs. First the permitting process, and the next is the building and all that. And he goes, it's 20 years for this, 20 years for that.
I don't know what it takes to build a reservoir, but I can tell you all the clay that is on the permitting, all you gotta do is dig a ditch. I've lived out here for quite a while, and anytime there's a low spot in the farm field, the water sits there for weeks.
But you can't divert that. That goes back to return flow.
Well, every time you build something, you divert water.
Yeah, but it changes the hydrology of the system on that. On-fish farm efficiency has many things. Greater yields, which is greater consumptive use. So that's why I was showing that. On the furrow, we're diverting 5, we're returning 3, so we're using 2. But when we go to high efficiency, now I'm 3 CFS consumptive use. That's why we're seeing lower return flows. Reducing leachings of nutrients, good and bad. Nitrates, we don't want that. We want it in the soil where the plant can use it. But one of the problems is leaching of salts. We're in a semi-arid climate. We're seeing the impact of this in the lower South Platte. South Platte Salinity Task Force, we're on it. It's harder to leach salts with a high efficiency system. Labor savings, furrow, like I told you. Downfalls, reduced return flows into the system. Need for greater storage. It's expensive. Agriculture cannot pay for the storage rights today at the cost. It's expensive. Greater issues with salinity. As we change efficiency, the changes to the system happen. And we have to overcome that because we still have to meet those water rights downstream that are senior to anything that we have. And that's just storage. Oh, that was the end of that. That was a talk I gave. I thought I deleted that slide. So that's what the basin system efficiency looks like. It's not easy. It's a complex system.
Awesome.
Oh, we got Karen.
Oh, Karen's got a question. Here you go.
Oh, sorry. Can you clarify why higher efficiency systems can lead to more water consumptive use?
Okay, several things. Because of the efficiency and you're still diverting X amount of water, it takes so long to get across a field with furrow irrigation. Might be 7 days, might be 10. You're now submerging it. You got waterlogged soils. Well, plants don't like waterlogged soils, so they have lower ET. Then you have longer time periods in between irrigations, so you got drier soils. So that's this up and down on water availability to the plant. Well, with a pivot, we're kind of waving along. I can start putting water on earlier with pivots, smaller amounts, meeting the consumptive needs of the plant, which results in higher water use. And yields of crops is highly correlated to water use, ET, like 95% confidence.
ET is evapotranspiration.
Yeah, ET, or crop water use.
All right, we
Just gotta eat it.
yeah. We probably have time for one question.
I'll be around later.
Well, you have to stick here for the panel anyway, so. All right. I think we need to pull up the next slide. Thank you very much. Let's give Joel a round of applause. You want? There you go. All right, here we go with Brett.
All right, great. So I'm talking about water sharing between agriculture and municipal use. And just like Joel said, there's a lot more that could be talked about here that I'm going to have time for. So I'm going to give you a blast of several ideas, and then in the Q&A we can get into any of it if you want. So here's what I'm going to talk about. 5 things. Water and agriculture, we already talked about that. I'll be brief. Alternative transfer methods. This is the idea of we do the status quo one way of transferring water from ag to municipal use. What are some alternatives to that? An example of it in Colorado, and not just Colorado, but here on the Front Range, barriers to this idea of water sharing, which there are a lot of. And then I wrote complementary actions, so putting the idea of water sharing to the side. If the goal is keeping farms in production locally, what are some other things we can do from a water mindset? So, irrigated agriculture, this is the same pie chart you have seen. This is the 3rd time or 4th time you've seen it. These are different numbers. This is the U.S. Geological Survey, but it's the general same. It's the same thing. And what I'm showing here is 87% of the diversions, not consumptive use. USGS only tracks diversions. Of the diversions are ag, and this is statewide. 8% is about public supply or municipal supply. So this has been touched upon. I just wanted to sort of maybe say it. Farms own the best water rights in the state. Our state was developed with an economy of agriculture. At the time it was developed, when we created this prior appropriation system, it was basically you could go claim the use of our state's natural resource, and you got a right to do that. And then the next person got a right, and the next person got a right, and so on for generations. Well, all those rights, the reason people were claiming the water was to irrigate land, because that was a dominant economic activity at the time. So a lot of the best water rights in the state have been and continue to be held by the agricultural community. And when I mean the best, I mean the most senior, the highest reliability, the best locations. They're in agricultural use because of our state's history. Now, had another industry come in the late 1800s and been the dominant economic engine of the state, the water rights would be in that use, but that's not what happened. So that's why a lot of the water rights are in agricultural use. That, and in the early 1900s, we had a lot of reclamation programs funded by the federal government to basically develop economic activity in rural areas of the western US. They also have water rights associated with them. So what does Larimer County look like? That's the county. You can kind of, it's hard to see, if there's a little outline right here. This is Larimer County. This is I took this box and did a snapshot. This is from the Colorado Department of Water Resources map viewer. If you ever want to just dive deep on water, go to this map viewer and just start clicking around. There is a wealth of information for everybody to look at on this map viewer. It is awesome. What you're looking at here is one of the things you can just click and see, I want to look at this. It's irrigated lands. Every 5 years, the state does a survey of satellite photos and picks out irrigated lands. These colors are the different crop types. But what you see here is, well, if you compare it to Weld County, which is just over here to the east, there's a ton of irrigated agriculture. Larimer County, you really have a few systems of ditches that are still in lots of production, but there's not a lot of irrigated agriculture in Larimer County. You got the North Pooter system, a couple systems here, Whisk, New Cache, Larimer, and Weld, kind of the head end of those systems, and then some systems that divert off the Big Thompson down here. But when I looked at this, my first reaction was, there's not a ton of irrigated agriculture compared to what it used to be, where everything from about this line up would have been irrigated, everything from about this line east would have been irrigated, and everything around this line southeast would have been irrigated. Because this is all where development has happened. But you can look at these map viewers of irrigated lands. I don't know how far back it goes. I want to say maybe 1990. But you can, every 5 years, so 2015, 2010, so on, you can look at the irrigated lands throughout the state of Colorado. So water sharing agreements, what's the whole idea? Well, the status quo and how we have built homes and businesses and anything else that uses water is sort of this top banner here, a permanent sale. So there's a willing seller, and because most of the water rights are held in agriculture and established in agriculture, because of the reasons I just said, they were the first economic activity in the state primarily, most of the water rights are in that use, most of the willing sellers are in agriculture. And then you have a willing buyer. Maybe it's a home developer, maybe it's a municipal government, and what happens is a permanent sale. So the farmer wants to sell, the municipality wants to buy. There's a permanent transfer of those water rights, permanent purchase, and it has a lot of benefits to both sides. From the seller's side, they get a large payment, they're done with the farm, they don't have to think about it, don't have to manage it. And on the buyer's side, it's finality. They don't have to, again, they don't have to work with a partner for a long period of time. They have ownership of it, and it's a known supply. It's just certainty. The alternative that has been talked about for over 10 years is, well, could we share water between these two uses? Not permanently transfer it, so it's owned by the municipality and used by the municipality, but could it be shared between these uses? Conceptually, yeah, you could do that. There's nothing legally preventing you from doing it. What it looks like is you'd have annual payments to the farmer. This property would stay in production in most years, not all years, in most years. And there'd be some flexibility in how they run their production. On the municipal side, it is a known supply, so the contract will define how often you get that supply. And then there's regional benefits that Greg was touching upon about keeping that land in production. So there's benefits to both sides, but this is what we mean by water sharing. It's taking a water resource that's been used on a farm for generations, and instead of permanently transferring it to, instead of permanently transferring it to another use, you're gonna use it in the new use some number of years, maybe 3 out of 10 is a common metric used. Maybe 3 out of 10 years it's used in municipal use. In the other 7 out of 10 years, it would stay in farming. That's the whole idea of these water sharing partnerships. So this, like I said, this has been talked about for over 10 years. Where it really started was in 2005, the state did this water supply plan called SWASI, State Water Supply Initiative. And that plan predicted that the state would lose 500,000 irrigated acres for over a 50-year time period. And that's about 20% of the total irrigated land in the state. The reasons it was going to lose 500,000 acres was about 100,000 acres were going to be built upon, so the farm was going to turn into homes. About 200,000 acres were thought to be transferred, the water would be transferred off farm to support land development. And about 200,000 acres were going to be lost for other reasons. Augmentation needs, compact compliance, that's interstate compact compliance, CRP enrollments, and groundwater overdraft. The biggest one here is groundwater overdraft. The reality is we have not been good groundwater managers for many decades, and that's coming to hit home in a lot of groundwater basins, not just in Colorado, but in the western US. So this was scary. And so the state started to think about, well, what could we do about that? If that's the prediction, what could we do about it? And so this idea came out that we could look at these alternative transfer methods, which had a name called abbreviation ATMs, basically that water sharing concept I just ran through. So in 2007, they set up a grant program to start to fund research into this and start to fund pilot projects into this. And then fast forward 8 years, 2015, the state water plan set a goal that we'd have 50,000 acre feet across the state involved in these water sharing agreements by 2030. So this grant program, since 2007, has funded about $8 million worth of work. That's as of 6 months ago. And my little chart here, the color coordination is blue dots are research, purple dots are pilot programs with munis, green dots are pilot programs with environmental uses. But what you see is prior to about 2015, most of the projects funded were research. This was things like some of the stuff Joel was actually working on, like how could you get consumptive use off a farm and still keep the farm in production? Could you go to a drier use crop? Could you actually do dry land farming for a number of years? So there's all sorts of research being done. And then it's been primarily pilots since 2015 that's been funded. But the state has put $8 million towards this question of, can we share water? So an example in Larimer County, Little Thompson Farm is right about here, southwest of Berthoud. City of Broomfield is down here, north of Denver. Carter Lake is called out because that is one of the Colorado Big Thompson Project reservoirs. And there is a pipeline network that gets water from this reservoir to City of Broomfield. It's this sort of the southern end of the CBT system. And so what happened? Well, Larimer County bought that farm. Larimer County, open space, bought that farm for $8.2 million. That farm came with 2 water supply sources, shares in a local ditch company called Handy Ditch, and a bunch of units of CBT water. Now, CBT water is highly transferable. Everything from Fort Collins to Broomfield, most of this area is built on the backbone of transferring CBT units from farm use to municipal use. So it came with a bunch of CBT units. So what happened was they entered into an agreement with Broomfield where Broomfield straight up bought a bunch of those units. I had the number in my notes, but anyway, $2.9 million worth. They just bought them and transferred them. Then there was some other CBT units where they entered into a partnership where in 3 out of 10 years, Broomfield can call on those units and use them for municipal use. In 7 out of 10 years, those units will go to the farm and keep farming. And there's payments involved in there. If you want to know more about this pilot, just Google Larimer County Little Thompson Farm. There's an entire web page that Larimer County has devoted to the project, and there's reports, and have fun. You can get as much information as you want on that. So I have two more topics to talk about. Barriers and complementary actions. So these could be good ideas, right? Water sharing between farms and municipalities. There are a lot of barriers to doing this: economic, regulatory, hydrologic, and comfort. They're all real. They're all important. I'll touch upon a few. Economic. The muni is going to build homes with this water. They have to have this really robust water portfolio that they just need to fine tune in order to make water sharing really pencil out. If they're going to use the water and support giving water to homes forever, indefinitely, it usually makes sense to buy the water rights. Economically, it makes sense. If you're paying lease, it's the same reason people buy homes instead of rent them forever if they have the economic means to do so. The economics of leasing forever typically don't work in your favor. In agriculture, and I've experienced this firsthand, there is a sentiment of why would I commit to a really long-term lease? Because I'm just taking options off the table for me and for my kids and my grandkids. You're tying up a huge amount of value when you say the water will never be transferred off this farm. It's a real thing. So economically, there are real hurdles to doing these water sharing agreements. If we want, just for time, I won't go into these other ones. But these are some of the barriers to why these things have been difficult to get in place. There have been successes. We did an inventory of these water sharing agreements a few years ago. I think there's something like 20 or 30 water sharing agreements across the state that have been implemented. So they can be done. a lot of success in the Arkansas Basin, down kind of below Pueblo Reservoir with these water sharing agreements. So complementary actions, I just have 3. So water's complicated, right? So what else could we do besides trying to share it? Easements, land easements. Just put water to the side. Don't worry about water. If you think an agricultural property has a lot of value and benefits to an area, put money towards conserving that land. Don't worry about the water. Just keep the land in agricultural production through agricultural conservation easements. Then second thing, municipal water dedication policies are really impactful. It's how we grow more people with less water use, and less water use means less transfers of water off farmland. So how do you encourage dense development? Tell the developer, you can build a home and dedicate less water to me if that home has a lower water use footprint. They will do it. It saves them money. They will be incentivized to do it. So we can, through dedication policies, we can incentivize dense development with not a lot of outdoor landscaping, and basically that will have the effect of keeping more farms in production to sort of the same number of people growing in the state. Finally, leasebacks. This isn't a great thing, but it is something that has been taking place and will continue to take place. The municipal water utilities acquire the water permanently. They own them. They have the rights to it. But municipalities are really good at water planning, typically. They're planning for the 60-year drought, right? The drought that comes once in a generation, which means in an average year, they're sitting on way more water than they need. This is up and down the state. This is everywhere. So in every year that they have a surplus of water, they typically do lease it back to agriculture. And my one thing I'll plug is, that's great, that should continue, but really where farmers benefit is long-term water leases. So Muni's really looking at their water portfolio and saying, could I lease this out for 20 years or 10 years? That certainty of having a water supply for like 10 years means the farmer can go get loans that they wouldn't otherwise be able to get, perhaps. So thinking about long-term water leases, it's not forever, because everyone worries about the forever aspect, but doing long-term water leases from Muni water holdings back to farms and agriculture is more beneficial than what's done today, which is sort of an annual thinking, do we have water, do we have water? So these are complementary. You're not sharing the water. Well, I guess here you're kind of sharing the water, but you're not like contractually sharing the water, but these are all sort of could be beneficial to agriculture. So that's it.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Thank you, Brad.
Should we do questions later?
I'm gonna say we could probably do one question. Here we go, right here.
I think this is along the lines of what you're talking about. I recently asked a 98-year-old woman, she's since passed, what the biggest thing that she noticed growing up her whole life in Colorado was. And she said the most productive farmland has been developed and is no longer producing produce.
Yeah. I can comment a little bit on that. So,
Use the mic to do it, though.
yeah, sure. Harsh reality, but it is true, and it's exactly what she was saying. So why is Fort Collins where it is? And why is Boulder where it is? Why is Denver where it is? They're there because over millennia, the mountains have been shedding sediment down, right, through river systems. And the sediment comes out and it deposits and it creates really productive soils. So all these rivers that are coming off the Front Range Mountains, the reason the towns originally developed where they are is because it was really productive ground, because it was right at the toe of where those soils had been developed from sedimentation off the mountains. As you move east, the soils do degrade. I mean, the most productive soils in the state are against the Front Range. And so, that's the harsh reality is the towns that originally were settled were some of the most productive ground. Those towns are turning into bigger cities and developing. Some of the most productive ground in the state is getting developed upon. Yeah.
Thank you again. Awesome. With that, yes, why not? 2 rounds of applause. As we pull up Katie's slide deck right now, if I forget to say it later. All of these slides are going to be available on the website. They're not quite there yet. I hopefully will have them there tomorrow. So we'll put the links. We've had several links mentioned throughout tonight. We'll make sure we put those on the website too. So kind of everything's in one spot for you. All right, Katie, take it away.
All right, thanks. All right, good evening. Thank you for having me. I'll be coming at you with a presentation from the perspective of Fort Collins Utilities Water Conservation Team. I'll be talking about urban water use and conservation, really high level. If you have questions about our programs and projects, feel free to ask them. Fort Collins Utilities is the largest of 3 major water districts in Fort Collins. There in blue is Fort Collins Utilities. We serve about 75% of the population of Fort Collins. In the northeast there, we have Elko Water District, East Larimer County Water District, and then to the south is Fort Collins Loveland Water District. So we have 3 major water districts. Fort Collins Utilities is the perspective I'm bringing here today. We serve about 75% of the population. We have about 36,000 accounts that we serve, so 33,000 residential, about 3,000 commercial. That includes things like businesses, schools, nonprofits, government, multifamily residential, things like that. We treat about 8 billion gallons a year, on average about 22 million gallons a day. And in our peak season, we're treating about 40 million gallons per day. So we're fortunate to have 2 sources of water supply, one from the Poudre River and the other, the Horsetooth Reservoir, which is part of the Colorado Big Thompson project. So it's nice to have this redundancy, especially when we need to pull off of one system in order to maybe let the other system cycle through bad water quality or things like that. So for example, in years where we previously had wildfires and sediment washes down into our watershed and into our Poudre River, for example, it's difficult to treat that really heavy sediment water. So that's when we'll switch to the Horsetooth supply and pull mostly off of Horsetooth in some cases. So in a given year, we pull about 50% off of either supply. One of the challenges that we have is storage, as mentioned previously. So we have a lack of storage. We have a great water portfolio, but we have a lack of storage. So if you've heard of the Halligan Reservoir project, that is a project to expand the capacity of that Halligan Reservoir to hold more water. So that project has been in process for decades in order to raise the level of that reservoir for more capacity. So some of the other challenges that we have are really climate related. When we have less snowpack or when we have warmer springs and we have early runoff, we're getting a lot more moisture coming down the hill. We can't use it fast enough and it keeps going. The challenge with that as far as water use in our community goes is that we'll have more frequent water restrictions go into place. So where water conservation comes in is trying to reduce the frequency of those water restrictions. So we'll talk more about that. So as far as utilities water use goes, on the left-hand side here is a chart that shows commercial water use, that's that blue curve, and residential water use, that's the orange curve. You can see that there's kind of that bell curve there. Anybody know what that bell curve signifies? It's pretty characteristic of most Western states. Why do we have more water use in the summer? Irrigation, yep, so we're watering our landscapes. So that's pretty characteristic of our Western states. In utilities, we use about 40% or 45% of our water goes onto our landscapes during the year. So on the right-hand side here, you can see some of those breakdowns, outdoor versus indoor, commercial versus residential. And then in that bottom pie chart there, you'll see the breakdown of different residential uses that we have in our system. So one of the ways that we track our water use over time, and that many communities track their water use over time, is by using this metric called gallons per capita per day, or GPCD. So gallons per capita per day is calculated by total treated water volume divided by population. And we set goals based on this GPCD. So back in 2015, Fort Collins set a goal to get to 130 GPCD by 2030. This chart shows our progress toward that goal. Last year we were at 139 GPCD. We are not on track to meet that 130 by 2030. If we were on track, we'd be at 138 GPCD. So, but one thing to point out, we have had reductions in GPCD in the last 20 years, especially when you look at that orange line, wherever my pointer is, but the orange line, you can see it. The orange line is increasing over time, right? But we're seeing that GPCD remains relatively stable. So we're getting more folks on our system, but we're not increasing our water use by much. So in order to kind of meet these goals, this GPCD goal, one of the ways to do that is with water conservation. So we need to sharpen our pencils and find more ways to do the same or do more with less. So that's where water conservation comes in. Karen did a great job defining these words that I've been saying and everybody else has been saying. So examples of conservation and efficiency, and then in addition to that, demand management. So our water conservation team works together to really bring down the demand on our system, and that's what we call demand management. It's using a whole bunch of strategies and tools in our toolbox to bring that demand down. So our team, the purpose of our team is, again, demand management. We offer services and programs to help bring that demand down. The first inkling of water conservation in Fort Collins utilities happened in 1977, and since then, here in 2023, we have 8 full-time employees on our water conservation team, and we have over 16 programs and services that we offer our users to reduce their water use. So some examples of that include really primarily focused on incentives and voluntary programs that our customers can take part in. So we have a free sprinkler assessment program that we offer to residents, owners, renters to get their irrigation systems and schedules kind of at a more efficient level. We also offer typical cash for grass type programs. Our Xeriscape incentive program offers a rebate for any area that was previously grass and replaced with water-wise landscaping. And we also leverage our advanced metering infrastructure, so we can see the hourly water use on accounts, and we offer that service and allow our customers to access their own data to see where their water use is tracking. With that system, we can also do automated leak notifications and things like that. We are in a place where we're moving from, kind of this incentive-based and voluntary programs to maybe some more policy solutions. So one of the programs or projects I'm working on right now is update to our land use code to put some more landscape standards on our development. So that would require our outdoor landscapes to be more water smart from the start. So building those landscapes with perhaps less grass or more efficient equipment to sustain the future of a hotter and drier climate. So for context here, I will go back to the slide, so there's no spoiler here, but for context here, our water conservation program saved about 2% of our annual treated demand. About 173 million gallons is how much we measured in savings through our services and programs through the water conservation team last year. So not a small amount, but not a large amount, right? So we have a lot of work to do. There are lots of challenges, and let's call them opportunities, right? So there are those uncontrollable, pretty much uncontrollable factors like growth in population, climate, precipitation, weather, those kinds of things. There are also some of these other challenges like outdoor efficiency. So thinking about those landscape codes and requiring more efficient equipment, requiring less grass in a landscape is great, but like we say behind the scenes quite often, you can require the most efficient equipment, the most water-wise landscape, but it's the people who manage the water that can really save that water. So it's not the landscape, it's not the irrigation that's saving water. It's the people that are saving the water. So we know that pairing that with education is really, really important. So those are. So we often pair those types of programs and projects with education opportunities for our community. So to kind of wrap it up here in the end, it wouldn't be 2023 on the water conservation team if we didn't mention our own water efficiency plan update that we're working through. So this is a massive project that we're undertaking here. It's the water efficiency plans were mentioned a couple times so far tonight. It's a state mandated requirement for water providers of a certain size, and we have to update that plan. It really acts as our guide to our water conservation programs and strategies. So we set goals in that plan. We identify strategies to get to those goals. One of the really exciting things I think with this update, we are engaging in modeling scenarios that will help us identify those strategies that are most effective, that will both save water and contribute or benefit some of these other shared and common goals that we have in our community, like water equity, attractive landscapes, right? We don't want to just remove the grass and replace it with rock because we're losing a ton of environmental benefit, right? Landscape provides a heat sink, it provides recreation opportunities, it provides habitat, I could go on and on, right? So we really need to balance the strategies that we select in our water efficiency plan to make sure that we are moving forward in a way that our community is really on board with as well. So I think that is it for me. That's my last slide. So looking forward to questions and comments.
Thank you, Katie. All right, do we have any clarifying questions for Katie before we move to, I'll have my panelists go back to their mics, and I'm gonna remind them right now when they speak into them, press the green button. All right, so there's some questions in back. Go ahead.
So how big a customer is the city of Fort Collins? And is there, what's being done from the customer point of view to be more efficient? And have you measured what the city has done to reduce its own water use?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I will say that there has been some measurement and some effort toward water efficiency, especially in our parks and our golf courses. There have been massive projects to overhaul irrigation systems that have aged out and are wasting significant amount of water. So there are efforts and master plans to replace irrigation systems. So that's one measurable kind of improvement there. With our water efficiency plan update, we are looking to really set those goals within the plan for our municipal water use as well.
Thank you.
Hi, I apologize, but I'm pretty shocked that with the 3 R's of reduce, reuse, and recycle, that there's been absolutely no message of reuse. Before that, for example, when you use hot water, so that you don't waste cold water going into like the dishwasher, then I do a load of laundry that's usually at this point warm, not hot water, but that saves water from going from one to the other, wasting cold water. The other thing to get hot water in my sink, I have some gallon jugs, and until it gets to be hot, I save that cold to warm water in my gallon jugs and use it usually for watering plants and outside. In my toilet, I save the water from my showers, again in gallon jugs, and use that to flush my toilet. You've not mentioned anything about reuse. And that's for all.
Go for it, anybody who wants to respond. Don't all jump at once.
I can speak to that a little bit. So in the city of Fort Collins, we do have an ordinance that allows for gray water use and flushing toilets. So the water that is used for things like washing machines can be diverted to flush, diverted into a toilet tank and used for toilet flushing. So that is an ordinance that passed, I think it was 3 years ago, when gray water at the state level became legal. There are many limitations to gray water systems within our systems and within kind of the realm of water rights. So at this time, that's the kind of only legal way that we are promoting gray water reuse.
Thank you, Katie. And I'll say too, this is a good transition. We can go to questions for the whole panel now. So with that, go ahead.
Brett, I heard you talk about higher density. I have a real issue with what's happening with higher density. More fire events like Marshall Fire, hotter, drier climate, more utilities. Don't think that that's the best answer, at least in my opinion. Now, I think it's unfortunate that this poor woman back here is going to this extreme to save water so we can continue growing. Is this where we're going with our lifestyles? I mean, really? I think everybody can hear me pretty well. Is anybody here who can't hear me? Is there anybody who can't hear me?
They're recording.
Oh, okay. Well, I'm sorry.
That's all right.
I can't do more than prayer.
Okay. Did anyone have a response? Brett, go ahead.
Yeah, I think I'm not advocating about density, but I would say the reason I brought it up, if preserving farmland is your objective, that is a way to do it. So not touching any other objective that's out there, that is a way to do it.
Thank you.
I just want to touch on kind of water equity and justice issues. This is a problem that we're aware of in our state. There are many people who, can't afford their water, and they're going to extreme situations to, try and conserve and use as little water as possible. Many people don't have access to clean water. And this is something that the Colorado Water Center is dedicating more effort and time in this aspect. We're going to be doing a survey with water agencies to see what the focus is, like what the awareness is and current programming is around water equity issues in our state, and then also do a survey with actual community members to see what the issues are on the ground. But there is a lot of work that needs to be done in this space and a lot more awareness of it. I think in Colorado, we tend to think everyone's, living the good life in our communities on the Front Range, and the fact is that is not the case for all community members. So.
And Karen, correct me if I'm wrong. I do believe we have a session with a speaker who's going to speak specifically about that issue. Am I correct?
Jessica Thrasher is the Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Program Lead at the Colorado Water Center, and she'll be speaking on water equity issues at our last session, whatever date, November. In November.
In November.
Okay, and I'm just back on the gray water use issue. I want to applaud the state of Colorado for passing a law that allows for gray water reuse and using water twice. I definitely personally pushed very hard for that. I make a product that does exactly repurposing water for flushing toilets, and I pushed for 5 years, and it finally worked, and they said you can use water from inside the house to flush the toilet, and it was a major reason why. It's maybe some people have seen the sink on top of the toilet. It's made the press and so forth, and I'm just hoping that kind of thinking, the ability to use water twice, does make it to municipalities and to consumers, and I think it will absolutely hit the goals of that have been set by the municipalities.
Thank you. Oh, great, go ahead. Very cool product, by the way. Yeah.
Yeah, I guess I can just speak a little bit about the reuse, and I think Joel didn't use the word, but when he's describing what's happening on the South Platte with agriculture, I mean, we reuse and about 7 times water's reused on the South Platte, and it's just something that happens again and again. And when you go and you look at these ditches, like you have one in Fort Morgan Canal, what we call is they sweep the river, and so dry up the river, and then sure enough, by the time you get to the ditch that Joel mentioned, Sterling number 1, it's a full river again. And it's just that sponge, that underground sponge of that alluvial aquifer. And I just know with the more municipal reuse, I mean, I've looked into trying to use that for ag operations. It is a nightmare of a process to work with CDPHE to even get approved to do that. It is not easy at all. And the amount of time and work you essentially have to put in a research report to even get that to happen is pretty difficult. And so I just know from that, it's not worth the time there.
Joel, go
I'd
ahead.
like to make a comment on this. How you do the reuse is going to depend a lot upon the water rights and the description of the water rights. If it's a native supply, you have the right to one use. That means that once you put it in the sink, you wash your hands, it's supposed to go down drain. I mean, the water conservation is great. If it's CBT water, trans-basin diversion water, you got the right to use it to extinction. And the question that's going to become in play is how much reuse is developed and what's the impact to people downriver that are actually senior rights. And right now it's kind of like 5 gallons here, 5 gallons there, big deal, not big, but now you start talking 500, if everybody does that, you got 1 million people in the Front Range, 5 million gallons here, 5 million gallons there. It adds up. 2002, the drought of 2002, the headwaters of the South Platte was where? Denver wastewater treatment facility. There was no water above that flowing into the system. And what was happening there is Denver put it and said, if it's yellow, let it mellow in your toilets. If it's brown, flush it down. They didn't realize what was impacting water rights downstream. I went into one meeting and they were talking this up, and I said, well, in an agricultural standpoint, here's the motto: flush 3 times, make a farmer happy. Because there was ditches right below Denver that were built off their wastewater. They were shut down. They dried up for the entire summer. They had no recourse at that point. So it's got to be this fine line of how to manage the water within the system. Because, like I said, it's a water-limited situation. Look how many times we use and reuse that 1.4 million native acre feet. And how it's designed to get down to the people that have originally developed it.
Yeah, just wanted to add on to what Joel said, where like reusing water in your house, there's benefits to that, especially cost. But really when you look at the whole system, the water going down your drain is not a loss. The water running off the end of a farm field is not a loss. Really, the only losses that we have are evaporation and what is being consumed by plants and ourselves in food and drink. That's when we're actually removing water from the system. I mean, there's power generation to some, but in general, those are what's going down your drain is not disappears. And we in the state and a lot of districts, I mean, the amount of accounting that is tracking water and return flows and drains, that's all being accounted for.
Thank you. Do you have a question?
Finish up
sorry.
on that quick. Because City of Fort Collins, you said 45% of your water is outdoor water use, which is basically watering your lawns and irrigation. And that's the net loss in a municipality system. It has benefits, but it has drawbacks. Can you eat your lawn? Are you going to eat your grass? Cash for grass has multiple meanings in Colorado now. But the aspect of it is, what can you eat? I mean, there are benefits. There's the cooling effect of lawns and this and that, but there are downfall effects in the water system. And once it's transpired, it doesn't stay in the state of Colorado. It goes to further east. I mean, we got air movement east to west, or west to east. So it's headed to Nebraska, Kansas, wherever, and it's going to fall as precipitation again. It's the cycle of it. But as far as water conservation, the biggest impact you can have, because half the water's, is outdoor, is that landscape irrigation. Going to water smart landscapes, plants that use less water. I've ripped out my entire yard on my house, and I'm going to buffalo grass. Takes a little water to get going, but once it's done, I'm going I'm done. Because I live in the Ogallala Aquifer, which is basically we're depleting that. It is renewable, but slower than what we can replenish it.
Thank you, Joel. Hey guys, we can't hear without the mic, so here we go.
Depends upon which breeding plant you use. There are turf grass varieties that are not clump.
Okay. All right, next question.
My question is for Katie about the supply and storage. If you could just clarify for me, you said the supply for Fort Collins is the Cache-la-Poudre and Horsetooth Reservoir, and I know Horsetooth Reservoir is part of CBT. First question is the Poudre River outside of CBT? And my next question is about the Halligan Reservoir. If Horsetooth is a reservoir, it kind of is a storage reservoir as part of CBT, what is the need for the Reservoir?
Thank you. Go ahead, Katie.
All right. The Poudre River is outside of the CBT system. So CBT system takes water from the western slope and brings it on to over to the eastern slope. And so the Poudre River is separate from the CBT system. Halligan would act as a storage or does act as a storage for the Poudre River. Horsetooth is directly connected to the CBT system. So it would allow us to store that Poudre water.
Thanks, Katie.
Can I add to that?
Please go ahead.
A big important thing for Fort Collins is the CBT reservoir, Horsetooth Reservoir and Carter Lake. Those are reservoirs that you own shares in, contract units. So you have a contract that gives you a certain amount of water, but you cannot put your own water in those reservoirs. Those reservoirs are only the water of the project. A reservoir like Halligan, the city owns a lot of water rights on the Poudre system. A reservoir like Halligan will allow the city of Fort Collins to store water it already holds and uses in its own reservoir, which is not something Horsetooth could ever provide.
Question for Joel. Joel, in the Colorado Water Plan, are there agriculture conservation measures in there, in the water plan?
There are some, but we understand what the system is, and we know what the management aspects of conservation do. I mean, what we're looking at more is looking at trying to get to lower water use crops, but that's difficult because of the way the economy's set up. That's why what I'm doing on certain things, I'm looking at these alternatives, but they're lower income generally, or they're very finicky crops with marketing. You can grow a pickup load of this crop, but a pickup load in a 5-gallon bucket, and the market crashes. Whereas you have corn and stuff like that, which is very storable, very feedable, high market, and multiple uses. I mean, you have ethanol, you have food grade products, cattle industry, pork, chicken, swine. Well, I guess that's pork. There's multiple industries. And then also they're trying to find industrial uses for parts of that. I know back when I was going to college, they were looking at plastics with corn. So there's those issues that we have to look at. And everybody says, well, we're growing corn in a desert. Well, it's a great cattle feeding operation, and we can grow certain things here to do that. And one thing I always say, well, and people take it different ways. Agricultural use diverts, or uses 86% of the water, but the citizens of the state of Colorado consume 100% of that water. We eat the beef. We may export beef, but we import other things. We consume 100% of the water. So it's all in everybody's best interest to be as water efficient as possible. But the understanding, my presentation was more of the understanding of what efficiency does on the farm in the long term and downstream. It can really wreck the system and change it. And if we can't get more storage built to hold those high water flows, and we diminish that alluvial aquifer system because of return flows, it's got repercussions that a lot of people don't look at.
I'll just add on to what Joel said, a bit of just conservation goals. I guess if I wanted to be cynical and snarky, I could say, well, of all the sectors, only one sector is going to be using less water in 20 years, and that's agriculture. And that's because, and that could be up to 20% of agriculture. The cities aren't going to decrease 20% in their use. That isn't going to happen. I think for many of us in the community, we look at that and we're like, well, we just want to lose we just want to lose a hand, not a whole arm in 20 years. And when you talk about, well, outside of the fallowing and dry up, and Joel can correct me on this, he's done a ton of this work. When you're talking about, if you're looking at an acre of irrigated corn, and what water can you really pull out of that and still grow a great corn crop, you're talking 5, 10, at the most 15%. That's it. And we're really only talking about water that is evaporating from the soil.
It's not even that.
I'm trying to be positive here, Joel. But so there isn't, I think people think that there's this reservoir that you can also just get a lot of water out of there and things can still be fine. And it's like, no. And for some purposes, even 5% can mean a lot, especially in some of these groundwater areas where if everybody's decreasing by 5%, that prolongs their aquifer a long time. And then Joel mentioned alternative crops, and that is a possibility. It is very difficult to pull off at scale. You have very few cases of this happening at scale in the West, and farmers grow what sells. And they are not, it's not just, you can get them to grow anything, but then there's the market, there's the distributor, there's processing, and that takes years, and they don't necessarily have control over that. And there are individual farmers out there who I know who've gone out, and they themselves have spent years building relationships to sell organic rye or fingerling potatoes, but they've had to do all of that themselves, and it is a ton of work. And now, and it's somewhat unrelated, but we had a ag workers bill passed last year. I would not tell any farmer to grow anything that requires more labor. Water's a big problem, but honestly, our biggest problem in the West with ag is labor, and to the point where a lot of those people they're getting out of these other high value crops because they can't afford to grow them anymore.
Yeah, finding the labor is the difficult part. And the marketing aspect is the big thing. It's a business. Everybody says, well, farmers are happy and go lucky. You can't pay the bank back, you're out of business and somebody else is buying you. You have to make money to pay for that equipment. How much does a combine cost? Anybody know here? $250,000, keep going. $500,000, keep going. Right now it's corn silage time. How much does those big machines cost? Keep going. $1 million. You're close.
Wow.
So you can see what those costs are. You look at the numbers and you go like, how can somebody get into agriculture with those kind of costs? And now you can start talking water costs in certain basins. CBT water. What's the price tag on CBT water today?
100,000 an acre.
Is an acre foot, but a share is about 75, 80,000. I can't pay 75 or 80,000 and grow a crop. Any crop, I don't care. Even cash for grass, can't make that pay. And that's why CBT water, when it was first developed, was what, 80% ag, 20% municipality, or 90-10, somewhere in that neighborhood? It's reversed. It's mostly municipal owned. 80%, like the last number I saw was 80%, wasn't it? Somewhere in that? It's now 90. Okay. When I came to Colorado in 2000, I could bought CBT water for about $1,500 a share.
I think, first of all, I want to say I am not opposed to farming and I'm not opposed to eating. I think there's a little bit of a misrepresentation to some degree, and I don't fault you for defending the agricultural industry. That's probably what your roles are. But there's a lot of premise on the agriculture that is developed in this part of the country that doesn't make sense, never has made sense. It's taken excessive amounts of water to defend a cattle industry that consumes a tremendous amount of water that doesn't add up. I'm not a big proponent of growth either, so I'm not exactly here to say let's convert that into homes. But I just think we're getting a little bit misrepresentative. Some of the people here, left here, I don't defend or wouldn't fault them for defending the ag industry, but there's a lot of different sides to that story. And a lot of the ag that's out there has been harmful. It's hard to defend. Like I said, the aquifers are draining. The cost of that, I don't know if you guys have any ideas on how much irrigable land, which will no longer be able to be irrigated just due to cost of pumping that water as that aquifer continues to drop. Municipalities that'll be affected by that availability of water as well. I don't mean to stir it up. I'm just saying I think there's more than one story to the ag story in this part of the country, and that goes for the entire West.
There is, but it's the consumer that drives that.
Well,
agricultural meets the needs of the consumers.
Just to that point, how much of the crops that we produce do not get consumed in Colorado? They get exported because they're cheap, because they get for cheap water.
But then we import crops from other places because it's cheap.
Well,
it's a roundabout with these things. I mean, we're a net importer of corn. Colorado does not export a drop of corn, except unless it walks on four legs.
That's what I say, because we raise so many cattle on corn, which cost, I don't know how many thousands of gallons of water to raise 1 pound of beef, but it's a big number. So I'm not, again, it's just that if we take into account one perspective, it really kind of skews really what's going on with water to some degree.
But if we take cattle out of the equation, how many acres of range are now wasted? They won't produce a drop of anything. That's ground that is not suitable for anything but cattle. And there's a lot of that in the state of Colorado. That's why we have that's why we have a lot of cow-calf operations. That ground is not suitable for anything other than cattle. We could ship the cattle out of state, and then we lose that economic driver of employment in areas. And people are actually saying, well, the feedlots are coming west for several reasons. One is climate. It's better to raise cattle in this drier climate because you're not fighting mud. We're not fighting the humidity. I grew up in eastern Nebraska. One day, one feedlot, when they had a 120-degree heat index, the guy lost 1,300 head. They just dropped dead. They don't do that out here very often because we don't see those kind of heat indexes because of humidity. That's why they've moved west. California used to have a big dairy industry. Due to growth and legislation and litigation issues, that's moved east to Texas, Kansas, Colorado because of that issue as well. So where do you put all this? I don't know. There's no right issue. There's no wrong issues. It's all economics into the system. The cities, agriculture will never compete with cities, period. You can buy out all the agricultural water you want. And the water loss that was stated, the 500,000 acres, I don't think that was right. I think it's low. That's 500,000 acres in the South Platte Basin itself. So 80%, roughly 80% of the ag, 75% of the ag in the South Platte will be gone, going to the municipals in the Front Range. What happens to cities like Fort Morgan, Sterling, Julesburg? They'll dry up and blow away. These are their economic drivers in those communities, not what's happening in the Front Range. With the water supply, they have to have those water supplies to keep their economies driving. There's nothing out there that will replace agriculture for those communities. And I'm not supporting any one thing. I'm just the bearer of bad news when it comes to this.
I can't agree with you more. The bottom line is we
Yeah.
created a system that's failed from the start and continues to fail. It was never meant.
I don't want to cut you guys off, but I know we still have a few more people with a few questions. We're running out of time, so go ahead.
Well, my question does touch on something Joel just mentioned, but it's more for Greg. You had the figure from a study in 2005 that was that 500,000 acres that were going to be lost of irrigated land. Do you have an update on that? 'Cause it's been almost 20 years, and I didn't know if you had also revenue lost or labor lost with that.
Yeah, so what the most recent update was 2019, I think, in the technical update to the water plan. And part of the issue with, so we have a range, and they've got a couple different scenarios for each basin. And in the South Platte, roughly 20% is the highest number, 5% is the lowest number. And it all depends on whether or not growth, climate, and then getting hard numbers on the data of how much irrigated acreage there is right now is tough, and how much is owned by agriculture is difficult for a couple of reasons. Partly because in especially areas like here, you have a decent amount of water owned by cities that's leased back. And so it's like, well, how much in a given year, and it can change. And then getting this data of irrigated acres, we do it every 5 years. And so at the moment, it's still, we're losing irrigated acres pretty much every basin in the state. But we're still early enough where it could be 5% in the South Platte. It could be 20%. Yeah.
Thanks, Greg. Oh, one more. We might have time for one or two more, so. Here you go.
Katie, you said Fort Collins is short of storage, and why have you chosen not to become part of the Glade project?
I'm not sure that Katie really made that decision, but.
I know she didn't, but maybe she knows why.
Oh, Chris, I know someone who can talk to that.
I don't know how. I used to be on Fort Collins City Council, so I will say that I think both projects were going on simultaneously. So it was because we had room to expand Halligan, and City of Fort Collins felt like that was a more environmentally sound project, expanding Halligan because it's already existing, and it doesn't have to use pumping because it's coming downhill, and so environmentally it was more sound, and there needed to be improvements to Halligan regardless, and so expanding it and allowing it to capture more water seemed like a better option. But I think that, because these projects take around 20 years or so to be able to, happen, I think that both projects were probably happening simultaneously. But I think the environmentally, I think that we thought Halligan was expanding that was a better option.
Awesome. All right, I think we have one more in the back, and then we're going to call it a night.
We talked about density, and that's a concern for me. I live in Loveland, not Fort Collins, and that's been a big issue in terms of housing and with the governor encouraging, I think legally, more density in housing. It's how many people should Loveland look to have in the coming years, but the density in terms of water, I'm seeing a problem with more dense housing.
Anyone have any kind of response?
So I think just two factual things. So not advocating for density or not, but typically there's a lot less outdoor landscaping with denser housing. And as stated, everything that goes down your drain is back to the river. So from a water loss standpoint, like loss from the system, dense housing has less of an impact than, your typical 4,000 square foot lot with a yard and a home. The other thing is with density is it was, at least I brought it up because it is how you accommodate more people with less agricultural land coming out of production. I think that's pretty factual. Like if you have denser housing, there's less land footprint to develop those homes, and the water needs per person and per home are less. So for instance, most municipal codes, and they do vary, but a typical municipal code will say something like, okay, you want to do multifamily housing, you've got to bring 0.2 acre feet per unit, per unit in that multi-unit. You want to build a single family home, you're bringing 0.4 or 0.5 acre feet per home. And that's what the developer needs to go acquire off farms to make that housing project work. So just by going to multifamily, you're basically cutting the amount of water that farms would dry up to accommodate that development. And that's just the system we have. So that's the context I was saying it in. And I'm not advocating more dense or less dense. I'm just saying if preserving farmland is a goal, or if keeping open space is a goal, or if using less water is a goal, all those goals point to denser housing being a better path than history, or sort of the status quo.
I'll help you out, Brett. Don't worry. I'll advocate for denser housing. Why not? Let's end on a negative note here. I mean, I think this does get into a really contentious issue, but I mean, Brett's right. With a lot of the data that we have denser housing is one way we can try to cram more people in here. I mean, I'm a kid, but I mean,
one way or the other, right? We're gonna grow.
Well, I grew up in Littleton. I can say I'm sixth generation. I can do all that and say all that like a lot of people. And yeah, I like the Front Range less every day. If I didn't, I left. And I came back to take care of my family. I wouldn't be here if it wasn't for them. I don't think I have the right to tell anybody else they can't live here. And it's frustrating, but I don't think I have that right. And Colorado, everybody wants to be the last person to move here. And it's just not true. And I feel for it and everybody, because I hate what my home has become. I feel like a migrant in my own town, but they're just doing the same thing my ancestors did. And when my ancestors came here, you should have seen what they did to the locals. It was a lot rougher.
Joel, you're going to bring us something up, right?
Yeah. One thing on the population growth you have to remember, though, there is net migration in, but roughly half are your kids staying within the community. That's what you want, don't you? Or you want to move LA or here or there. You want to stay in the community. So half the growth of the Front Range is projected to be the kids within these families that are already here.
Interesting.
So you have to look at that. That's one of the issues with rural Colorado. We have a net migration of our kids out. And towns are dying slowly but surely, depending upon what economic development they can bring in and develop. So you have to look at it two different ways. The people are here. You're going to put them somewhere. Where do you put them? Do you spread them out everywhere? And it depends upon where they want to live. I mean, if you tell them, you can't live here, you got to live over here. That's not what America was built by. There was some freedoms, and there's give and take. And I don't know the answer to this whole thing. Nobody knows the answer to this thing. If you knew the answer, I'd be a trillionaire. I wouldn't have to worry about working.
Right? Well, and I think that's a good point, and a good kind of conclusion is I don't think anybody has the answer, and that's why we're having these conversations. And with that, I appreciate all of you coming tonight to be involved in these conversations. It was I learned a lot, so thank you. Let's give them one more round of applause. And thank you again to the Colorado Water Center and our commissioners for hosting tonight. We do have 2 more sessions. So if you want reminders about the sessions, there was a sign-in in the back. We'll add you to the list to remind you about the sessions coming up. And there's also an agenda that has lots of good information and links for you guys to learn more about our upcoming sessions. And as I said, we'll post this recording if you want to share it with all of your friends. We'll get it on the website. You guys can share it out to all of your friends and your family and your neighbors. And hopefully we'll be back in this building for our October session. And then we'll be back in Fort Collins for the one in November. So I hope to see you guys. Next time traffic's bad, right? So no excuses next time. Okay, thanks, everyone.